Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. In today's chapter, Jesse James and his brother Frank get a taste of the pirate life as they explore the newly raised Queen Anne's Revenge. Chapter 26. The Pirate Life. Frank James let out a low whistle as they spotted the careened Queen Anne's Revenge in a lonely cove a few miles from the main port. "And here I thought you was yarning the hours away about this pirate ship," he said to Anne as she adjusted the tiller to take them closer to the large frigate. The ship was listing only slightly now as the tide was coming in to fill the cove. Anne knew that it was necessary for the damaged hull to be out of the water so the repairs could be made. From where Anne sat, she could see that a patch of new wood was already in place, and once the tide came all the way in, by moonrise the ship would be able to free herself from the shallow bottom. She shielded her eyes from the low sun and visually inspected the condition of the Queen Anne. The masts and rigging were still intact, and the reefed sails most likely would function with just the short time the ship had been underwater. The cleanup would be extensive, but she was confident the ship would sail. Frank and Jesse gazed admiringly at the vessel. The craftsmanship and artistry that went into the construction of such a ship was difficult to comprehend. The ornate paneling of the 3-story-high aft castle called to mind the most beautiful architecture that they'd seen in paintings of European churches and castles. Frank took in the extensive and confusing web of rigging, yardarms, booms, and masts that stretched out well past the structure of the ship and possibly over 100 feet high. He could see narrow decks that circled the beams of the masts at variable intervals. He knew from books that the topmost deck was called the Crow's Nest, a place so high that one would be able to see for miles in all directions. The two men couldn't take their eyes from the ship as Anne steered their craft toward it without their novice hands to assist. Several rifles were trained upon them as they approached until Mary called out to Anne, recognizing her from the deck of the ship. A few of the tugboat men had stayed behind to work on the repairs and cleanup with the promise of high wages. The tug captain and crew were well paid with a share of Blackbeard's treasure, and were sworn to silence on the threat of death that would be delivered by Black Caesar and Charles Vane, should they go flapping their lips. Anne was able to sail up to the side of the Queen Anne and tie their small craft to the rigging. Mary rolled a ladder down for them to climb aboard. Jesse and Frank followed Anne up and over the rails to greet Mary. The two women embraced. "I'm so glad you got away. You saw my message at the stables?" Mary asked. "I did. Clever girl with the knot," Anne said. "So this ship was really at the bottom of the bay?" Jesse asked. "Aye, and the repairs are going quick. Just one hole, really. A really big hole, but still just about patched," Mary said. "So she'll sail again?" asked Anne. "With the moon if necessary, and if the tides allow," Mary answered. "Well, it's nice to see our investment in this endeavor is about to pay off," Frank James said. Anne looked around the chaotic deck. Linens and supplies lay about everywhere, drying out and in various stages of repair. A shirtless Vane and Black Caesar emerged from below decks, dirty and oily from their repairs. "Ah, cowboys and mermaids board our ship, Caesar," Vane said with a cat-ate-the-canary grin. "Blackbeard's ship," Black Caesar answered. "We have all earned our share, and a new crew deserves a new vote as to who will captain it," Vane said, placing a battered and drying tricorn on his head. "Skeleton crew we have here. Unless these two landlubbers Anne has conscripted know anything about sailing, we are going to be hard-pressed to get the Queen Anne out on the open sea," Mary noted. "What of the captain?" Black Caesar asked. "We've heard nothing. But the more pressing matter is that we saw Jennings and Woodes Rogers commandeering that iron beast with enormous cannons that sat in port with Navy men aboard," Anne said. Vane, Caesar, and Mary remembered the low iron ship with the deadly turret in the center. "Where's Charlotte and Blackbeard's cabin boy?" Anne asked. The black powder was all ruined from the seawater. She went to purchase more and stopped by the barn to bring the rest of the silver from the train. The boy went with the scientist to rescue Captain Blackbeard and Benjamin, Black Caesar said. "That damn silver was in the barn the whole time?" Frank asked. Black Caesar nodded. Just a boy and that namby-pamby are going to spring those two men? Wish I could be there to see that, Jessie said. Anne looked around the ship and up at the rigging. Then we are off with the tide? She asked. Aye, said Black Caesar. Anne turned to Jessie and Frank. You boys want a tour? I'd like to see the treasure I was offered a share of, for following all you odd sticks in this adventure, Frank said. The large main hold was mostly cleaned out of the broken crates and debris that had littered it after the sinking. The air still smelled of the rank seawater and growing mildew, but the hole made by the cannon barrel was patched and tarred to be waterproof against the bay. The wood floors still gleamed wet but were free of standing water. Several oil lamps illuminated the space as the group stood before 4 large chests that Mary Reed opened one by one to reveal a hoard of gold and silver coins, precious artifacts, silver and porcelain finery, and ornamental weapons inlaid with gold and jewels. Mary pulled a wet sack made from embroidered purple fabric and hefted it in her hand before tossing it to Frank. He opened it with curiosity, and his eyebrows arched. He poured a handful of gold dust from the bag into his palm, whistling low once again. Frank then looked over at the looming Black Caesar. Deal still stands? Equal share of this treasure? He asked, and Black Caesar nodded. If you ain't going to kiss this crazy filly you got us hooked up with, I will, Frank said to Jessie, and then gave a hearty cowboy, Yee-haw! Jessie took up the charge and yelled as well. That brought the rest of them into a small celebration of smiles and backpats. They all went searching through the chests, admiring the rarities and fineries. Caesar pulled a crate over and sat down to watch. As the ship's quartermaster, he would need to record the dividing of the shares of treasure to keep the accounting fair for all parties. With only a dozen or so shares to divide, his job wouldn't be difficult. Usually the crew numbered in the 80s or on occasion hundreds, making the accounts more onerous. He decided to let them enjoy their party of spoils before he took to writing down and recording each sailor's take. He fingered the large diamond cross that now hung around his neck. He was happy they were successful so far, but worried over the fate of his captain. The Queen Anne's Revenge would sail again, but would it do so with Blackbeard at the helm? He was having trouble pushing the dark thoughts aside as he sat watching the happy crew try on jewelry and run their fingers through piles of golden Spanish coins. Mary, where's that bottle of rum you found floating intact? Vane asked as he slipped several rings onto his dirt-covered fingers. Frank busted up laughing as the woman pulled the rum bottle from her flowing shirt. She uncorked it with her teeth and spit out the stopper. She handed the bottle to Vane after taking a swig herself. Then the bottle was passed to Frank, who took a long pull and wiped his mouth with his sleeve as he grimaced. Woo-wee, that is strong. Frank looked at the bottle's crude label. Jamaica, 1418, 14, he asked Mary. 1714, Mary answered with a snort. Frank looked again at the bottle and shook his head, then took another drink. Jessie was admiring a golden ring with a green sapphire when he caught the eye of Anne Bonny. She was testing the weight of an ornate hilted dagger by balancing it on 2 fingers, then 1. She tossed the blade into the air, and it spun twice before landing perfectly on the back of her hand. Then she flipped it again to land in her palm. Jessie approached her, holding up the ring in his thumb and forefinger. He moved himself into her space, standing very close, and she held her ground with a curious yet challenging look on her face. He brought the sapphire ring up between them, and the light reflected off it, illuminating her green eyes. I'm not sure which jewels are more lovely, Jessie said, staring into her eyes. Anne cocked her head to one side, watching him. What I mean is, your eyes are like jewels. Anne smiled at the man's awkward advance. Are you offering me this ring, or are you looking to take out my eyes? Anne smiled a devilish smile. The ring is yours if you'd like it, Jessie said, inching closer. Anne inched closer herself, looking up at his handsome face. Why don't you kiss me like your brother advised? Anne brushed her wavy, strawberry-colored hair to one side, revealing her bare neck and shoulder. Best do it before I change my mind and stab you with this exquisite dagger. Jessie put his hand on hers that held the blade, bending that arm around her back so that he could pull her closer still. The other hand caressed her neck, reaching up to the back of her head, fingers combing up through her hair. He tilted her head up toward his as his lips descended down to meet hers. Anne closed her eyes and wrapped one arm around Jesse's waist to pull him against her, and then kissed him long and passionately. For a moment all the world melted away. The only sound they heard was their own beating hearts. Gone were the noises of their friends as they drank and enjoyed the spoils of the moment. Anne and Jesse were only mere steps away from them, but seemed worlds apart as they wrapped each other in a kiss and embrace that shielded them in a cocoon of intense desire that seemed impenetrable. Slowly, gently, their lips parted, and Anne opened her eyes to see Jesse's closed lids. She moved her hand that still held the dagger up to his face and caressed his cheek with the back of her fingers. He slowly opened his eyes, a look of love-struck awe on his face. Anne smiled gently and kissed his lips once again, short and sweet. Jesse looked over at her hand against the skin of his face that still clutched the dagger. "Am I in danger?" "Oh, yes, most assuredly, but not today," Anne said, pushing him away but taking his hand in hers. She led him back over to the treasure trove. "How about that rum, Mary?" Mary laughed and nodded at Frank, who took one more swallow before handing it to Anne. Anne held the bottle in the air with one hand, the other held Jesse's. "To the pirate life!" She took a swig and then cheered with the rest joining in. I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.